Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special Christmas holiday episode of what are we called? Furidashi, the Furidashi podcast. I'm Nicholas.
Podcast.
I'm Nicholas. I am here with the lovely Lauren. Lauren, say hi to all of our lovely listeners.
Hello, lovely listeners. Yes, and welcome to our Furidashi podcast. This is episode 3 of season 5. Which always is interesting because this is like the beginning of our show for this year, but is also the end of the year of our review period.
Yeah.
So it's very exciting. It's happy Christmas season.
And so if you want our sort of year in review, you'll have to sign up over on Patreon, patreon.com/Furidashi, where you will find that episode, plus all of our lovely bonus episodes, which cover a huge variety of topics, including our Furidashi Classroom episodes, in which I, Nicholas Tyson, dig deep into various, like, really hardcore issues of game design, narrative design, and theory, generally speaking. But today, we are going to be talking about, I have like 2 favorite Christmas movies, one of which is The Lion in Winter, which is not anime and it's not a game, so we can't talk about it. But my second, I don't know, they're kind of equal to each other, but the other one is Tokyo Godfathers from 2006.
Which is just a fantastic Christmas movie because I love all things Christmas themed. Christmas was also a big part of my life growing up, but not in a traditional American sense.
Yeah.
And I have to say this because it was like both a Die Hard as a Christmas movie family, unironically, and also my dad had us watch It's a Wonderful Life every year. And I'm pretty sure I've seen that movie over 13 times.
Yeah.
And then closely followed by Miracle on 34th Street. And so I hate those quizzes that are like, what's the movie you've seen the most? And then assuming it's going to be the one that you like. And I'm like, no. It's definitely Miracle on, or what is it? It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
And then maybe it's Star Wars by also like 12 times. Okay. But It's a Wonderful Life is still too high. I need to watch more movies, more on repeat.
you need to, just put something on and watch it over and over again.
I do. Yes. But so for me, I was like, oh, what's a Christmas anime we can watch? What can we do? And then both of us looked at each other and were like, wait, Tokyo Godfathers.
Absolutely.
I love Satoshi Kon. So for me, I was just like, yes, of course I'm dumb, but let's do it. So I got to rewatch it. It was super fantastic. And now Nicholas will come at with like the themes and like the general topics that we're actually going to talk about versus me just being the Christmas spirit. Like Hannah, I'm just going to be like, yes, everything is great. Christmas.
Yeah, I mean, I have mixed feelings about Christmas, generally speaking, since historically, well, I was a theater kid growing up, and so I would always get essentially shanghaied into, I shouldn't say that, I got cajoled into always participating in our church's nativity play. And so over the course of the years, like, I steadily like rose up in the ranks of importance within the nativity play. But then I got into high school and I started falling down again. So because it's like there's a certain age at which like you're expected to play Mary or Joseph, and then for whatever reason you get relegated to like an angel or one of the magi. I was a magi the last time I ever participated, and I haven't been in a nativity play since. But that's not what we're talking about today. We are talking about Tokyo Godfathers by in my opinion, the best, well, formerly contemporary because he passed away a few years ago, but definitely the best modern Japanese animation director. I would even put him above Miyazaki, which I know is going to be heresy for a lot of people. If Kon's career had been longer, definitely would have been more highly regarded because the films and the one TV series that he did produce, like, there are a lot of dud Miyazaki movies, if I'm being 100% honest. Like, his non-duds are exceptional, but he does have duds. Um, I'm sorry. Like, we can talk about that maybe in the future when we do a Miyazaki film. But one of the things that's really important about Kon Satoshi is that he has a very like he does magical realism extremely well, because one of the things that he's known for, especially in the films that he specifically directed and also wrote, is this kind of bleeding of fantasy and reality, and that was there from the very beginning in his directorial debut, Perfect Blue, which I remember when that movie came out and I saw it on VHS, and I was floored. Like, absolutely, like, I had never seen a movie like that, much less an animated film. And then you have Millennium Actress, you have Paprika, which came out after Tokyo Godfathers, the series Paranoia Agent. In every one of these, and in fact, I would even include Tokyo Godfathers in this like thematic overview, where it's not entirely clear where you enter reality as such, I guess is the way I would describe it. I wouldn't describe it as surreal so much as there may be a reality, but it's unclear where either the characters or you as the audience watching the film understand that that reality is grounded, because the rug is constantly being pulled out from under you and also being pulled out from the characters as well. And I think Tokyo Godfathers fits that to a T. It just doesn't do it in quite the same like thrillery way that Kon's other films and his TV series do.
And I think it's that lack of thriller aspect that actually makes Tokyo Godfathers kind of like a precursor, or I don't want to say progenitor, that's not quite true, but it feels like it hits on all of those cozy slice of life notes
Yeah,
that you see and lacking in a lot of other like popular anime, I think in general, that are series that like follow the slice of life trend, but it's
yeah,
not the slice of life that you would consider as a vignettes, right? Like you're
yeah,
stepping into someone's just work day, and then after the work day ends, right, you kind of step out,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
And there is that central thriller aspect, right? And throughout the whole work, and it's almost done in a way that it's almost self-reflective of him,
Yeah,
because I think with Gene going through, it's like, oh, I'm not an action hero. And then by the end of it, he is absolutely an action hero. It's kind of showing that like he'll
yeah,
do whatever it takes, actually. Like he was trying to do that probably when this is getting into character development. So I'll save that argument for later.
yeah,
But I would say that's like the action hero aspect, right? Of thriller films, right? That action aspect, that tension, even if it's like a psychological action, like it's happening in the characters' heads, like
yeah,
there's a moment of anticipation and release that at the
yeah,
start of the film, they're like, these are not who we are. We're just homeless bums on the street. Like, this is a Christmas movie, right?
yeah.
And I liked how Nicholas started. Well, we're not talking about the nativity play, but in a bit of a way, we
It kind of
are
is, yeah,
talking
yeah.
about a nativity
They are
play.
definitely magi figures. That is true.
Yes.
Yes,
And so I
definitely.
do think that, like, while we're not quite talking about the nativity, right, we are in a way, right, having that theme, but as well as this theme of, well, he took out kind of the actual thriller aspect of it. He also then like re-put it in through the character arcs itself. So by the end of it, you do have that anticipation of like what is actually going to happen here. It could happen anyway, because so far everything's just been up to chance, a little bit held by fate, destiny, etc. So you're actually even at the end not 100% sure how he's going to end it, though you want it to be a happy ending, I think.
So I think I have an explanation for why that sort of, as you called it, slice of lifeiness causes the film to be perceived as very different from his other work. And that's because on this film, he actually worked with another screenwriter who is probably like most people wouldn't know her name, but like you go through her list of credits and you're like, oh my fucking God, she wrote that. And that's Nobumoto Keiko. Um, who for most people will probably be best recognized as the writer of Cowboy Bebop. But in addition to, in fact, I just want to, I brought it up on Wikipedia and I want to go through her credits because this is insane. So she wrote Cowboy Bebop, she wrote Wolf's Rain, she wrote Samurai Champloo, Space Dandy, in addition to Tokyo Godfathers. She also wrote probably the best Macross OVA, which is Macross Plus. And that's like to have those as your writing credits is just crazy. And to be as unknown as she is and have those writing credits,
Is
absurd.
insane.
Yeah.
She also actually was the scenario supervisor for one of my all-time favorite games, released in 2002, Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah. Like, Girlfriend is prolific, she is good, and she definitely understands, like, how to take something that is, like, even when it's high fantasy or, like, it's, like, space opera, to bring it down to a human level in such a way that you don't feel like you are, like, inhabiting an alien world for those 90 minutes. You feel like there is a real world, even if that real world is kind of fucking weird.
Yeah, what are we doing talking about the director here? Let's just talk about
Well,
Nobumoto Keiko for, like, the next season, next episode,
yeah,
I
yeah.
say.
I mean, we probably should actually, but I mean, the reason why she worked with Kon. Kon still was like the primary writer, primary director. He was the one who wrote the scenario that was approved by Madhouse. Like, the ideas and sort of like the structure, like all of that came from him. But like the details, all of the little juicy bits that flesh that out. I'm not going to say all of it, but a lot of it comes from her as well. And so I think you and I are always sort of resistant to the idea of like auteur theory and sort of like overly focusing on a particular individual. And I think this is a good example of why, because Kon was not a precious director. He was not a tyrant in the way that like a lot of other animation directors are. And a lot of that stems from the fact that he got his start, well, not his start, but he worked quite a bit with Oshii Mamoru, who was sort of like notoriously lazy and notoriously not a tyrant. And I think a lot of that rubs off onto Kon as well, because there is this. I mean, I don't know a lot about sort of like his personal work life when he was still around, but there are no like shitty stories about him as far as I'm aware. Now somebody's gonna like at me and be like, "Oh,
And
actually,
then
there's this
to
story."
just so that we're clear with Mamoru Oshii, you are talking about the Ghost in the Shell
Yeah,
director and writer. Okay, I just wanted to be super, super clear with everyone
yeah.
here. Just if you aren't familiar with Japanese directors like Nicholas and I are, that's what he's known for.
Yeah, so Oshi, so they worked together originally on Pat Labor 2, and I believe Kon also wrote one of the shorts for Memories, which is the collection of shorter like animated films that Oshi produced. So they worked together, but the thing is, also it's worth noting that Kon got his start as a key animator. And I know we haven't necessarily talked much about animation production, but sort of just very briefly to explain why a key animator is important is because a key animator is essentially the one who comes up with like the visual story beats. And then you'll have between animators, they're usually the ones who sort of like fill in the things between keyframes. And this is in classical animation where like you would have somebody who's like in a higher position of creative output who like produces keyframes or at least or even the person who does like the storyboards. And then generally speaking, you have a lot of really underpaid people who will then do the like the fill animation, the between animation. So even when he wasn't a director, he was still working in a creative capacity that allowed him to sort of develop and understand like the story structure and how the animation works to convey that narrative structure.
I think I have nothing to add to that because I was,
Go ahead.
yeah, I was, no, for me, I was going to kind of like, I don't have that historical like accuracy that you do for pinpointing, but I was going to say for me in all of his films, I think that I am now learning more about his past in a way that like I can now see how he used all of those kind of key animations and in his directing, specifically of Tokyo Godfathers, just because that's the one that I've like most recently watched right for this
Yeah.
episode. But I would say that when I remember Millennium Actress, there are a lot of like camera cuts and
Yeah.
scenes that resemble, I mean, at the time as I was like studying this, I was going to say modern filmography, but in Millennium Actress, a lot of them are in, I would say, real world filmography, right? That a lot of the camera cuts and scenes, and that is animation, right? Is how you have to, well, because it is an animated film. So animating the camera cuts are just as important as like animating the characters between those scenes. And I saw a lot of really detailed work there that I think that like kind of come back to him going, how do I slide in and out the backgrounds of the Millennium Actress scenes? How do I slide in and out her and animate her between these two phases of her life while
Yeah.
also just making it all look like and cut, right? And then it's just one camera shot. And I
Yeah.
think, and it's not just one camera shot, but to the viewer, right? It's one camera. That I think is really fascinating because in Tokyo Godfathers, what I saw more was like the characters themselves,
Yeah.
right? Animating between the scenes is what I think created that thrill of the chase, right? Or the moments of pause where it was the not a thrill, but like the calm of just care of caring, right?
Yeah.
For the child.
Yeah, no, I think that bleed effect and the way in which it's thought of in terms of cinematography rather than necessarily like the way animation is classically understood. I mean, some animators think in cinematographic terms, others don't. But in his other films, like that bleeding is very clearly visual. Like Millennium Actress is a really good example of this because you will see her in the film and then it will bleed back into her older self in the present, bleed into the film, bleed back, and it's sort of like the visual move is very obvious. Whereas the bleeding here occurs on a narrative and character level. A good example of this, actually, Lauren already used an example of this, which is Gin. He's constantly saying throughout, the film is like, oh, I'm not an action hero. I'm just a bum. I'm just like, I'm a nobody. I'm not significant. The implication being like, I'm not significant. I'm not a hero. I'm not supposed to do any of these things. But circumstances are constantly putting him in situations where he may not be a hero, but he has to behave heroically in like trying to care for this child and find her parents, her real parents. Um, and the other example that I can think of is also with Gin, where like from the beginning of the movie, he tells Hana this really sort of like romanticized story about how he became a homeless person, how he became unhoused. And it's so sweet, it's so tender, it's so tragic. It's also a lie. It's also just not true. And the true story is in many ways more interesting precisely because it gets to Gin's like deep insecurity. So this is what I mean by sort of like it bleeds narratively and in terms of character, because the way in which various characters, I guess you could say, falsify or even romanticize their own personal stories then says a lot about them. And then this then culminate, by the way, I'm going to spoil part of the film, so I'm sorry. Like he runs into his daughter much later in the film, the daughter who supposedly died but actually didn't die, she became a nurse, and they have this really sweet moment, and it seems like then the reality is going to become this sort of like fairy tale-esque thing. But it is in that moment that Hana actually interrupts and is like, how could you do this to your kid? What the fuck is wrong with you? How could you do that? In other words, the film and the way in which the characters interact with each other never allows it to be perfectly romanticized, even when you think that it's going to happen. Like it
Yeah.
won't let it.
And I think what's really like reflective about that though, right? Which really stands out to me is that if we are going to now go into kind of the character themes, is that like Jean and Hannah, right? Like she is in love with him, right? That is kind of teased in the beginning of the film, but you're not quite sure,
Yeah.
right? And then obviously is then just plainly stated actually after that moment.
Yeah.
Usually I do a spoiler like, hey, we're going to spoil this for you guys, but hopefully like it's been out since 2010.
Well, 2000, it premiered in Japan in 2003. I actually got it
Yeah,
wrong.
I
I
was
thought it
gonna
was
say, I was like, it's been
Pa-
out for a
Papri-
while.
Paprika was 2006. That's why
Oh,
I got them
okay.
mixed
That's
up.
why
Yeah.
that's why I was like 2006? No,
No,
2000
2003.
2003.
Yeah.
Um, and looking at that character, right, that level, the reason it's that return to reality, right, is that you want to romanticize it. She's like, "Hey, call me anytime," right? And
Yeah.
then it's the reality of you not only lied to your like, how could you do this to your daughter? Like, I can't believe that she should forgive you, right? But also, how could you do this to me? Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
she's projecting, right, all of her emotions and her feeling, right, and her love. That then when Miyuki does follow her and is like, oh, it's you love him, don't you? Like, you are being that harsh on him
Yeah.
because you actually too have fallen in love with him, right? And it's interesting because it's the version of himself when he was discarded, not an action hero, a drunkard on the street, trash,
Yeah.
right? And earlier in the film, he talks about how he became homeless at 30. And it has
Yeah.
been, what, quite a long time for him to then make up the story about his daughter dying. Like now she's 21 and he left, I think, when she was like 9. So it's been about like 10 years. So he's in
Yeah, it's
his
been a while. Yeah,
40s,
it's been a long time, yeah.
right? So he's been telling this story, right, about being a man who was like a bicycle racer. And if it wasn't for that one guy, right? And also long enough to convince himself that when he sees that guy again, he's like, it's his fault. Like,
Well, that's what's weird about it, is that it is kind of partially true because, like, he did get involved with, well, what is functionally a loan shark. And so, like, he is like, his anger towards him and the, like, usurious conditions that then sort of caused him to sort of fall out of his life and adopt this new identity. Um, like, it's not unreal. It's not quite accurate. It's not a perfectly accurate description of what's going on. But for Gin, it is extremely real. And it sort of puts him in this weird situation where, like, the thing that he had been saying, also, see, that's the thing, is that not only had he been romanticizing his past, but there were all these other things that he was saying about himself. He was constantly saying, I'm a piece of shit. Like, I am trash. I'm an awful human being. I'm not a hero. I'm not an action hero. And then when that true thing about himself, well, not true, but sort of unkind, but sort of true thing that he had been saying about himself the entire time, like, it's that Hana didn't want to believe is true, but in fact actually is. So the problem is that it's never as simple as, like, this is the lie, this is the truth. It's that the so-called lies and the so-called realities, they bleed into each other precisely because they're always mixed. They're never perfect.
yeah. And I think that really gets to my specific kind of like read and love of his films is that for this one in particular, I think that I did want to talk about the setting of Christmas, but since we're on characters, I'm going to kind of keep going on the character route just so
Yeah.
we're clear. Because the setting of Christmas does kind of give another overlay to this as well that is
Yeah.
interesting to explore. But with this one, it's all of his films, and particularly, I think Tokyo Godfathers is actually the best example, particularly as a Christmas film, is it's about the perceptions that we have of ourselves,
Yeah.
right? And also how society perceives us. Because I think in Gene's character arc, that moment where he is pretty much sitting at the bedside of an elderly homeless man who is holding this bag of lottery tickets,
Yeah.
right? That you
Well,
don't actually
we don't
know.
know. Yeah, we
We
don't
don't
know
know what
that.
it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
But this will come up later. Is holding this bag and is drinking out of his right stolen. Is it like whiskey? I think it's whiskey, or
The
sake or
bottle looks like
something.
a cognac bottle, but it could be
It looks like
whiskey.
a cognac
It's
bottle,
unclear
like,
what it
it's
is.
unclear, but he's drinking out of his bottle, right? He's drinking and he's, like, saying everything Gene has been saying about himself, or excuse me, Gene has been saying about himself, but is dying. And he's
Yeah.
like, "I am discarded. I am trash. No one cares about me. Nobody even knows, right, the difference between me being alive or dead." And Gene's like, "Yeah, that's exactly how I feel." But this is, like, his senior, right? Like, not someone
Yeah.
he necessarily looks up to, but someone that is his senior as a homeless man who's been discarded. And it's that man's like perception is like, this is how you will die if you live, right? The way that you continue to say these things about yourself to yourself.
Yeah.
But also, then there's this horrific moment that happens right after where, once again, we're going to spoil all of these things, but that in his arc, he's like, wait, I have to become better than trash, because all of these kind of like ruffians, right, like high school or college age drunk students,
Yeah.
come and start beating them up. But the old
Yeah.
man's already died, and the guys are either too drunk or too dumb or too violent, right, to even recognize that they're beating a dead man.
Yeah.
And it's horrible. Like
Oh,
it's
yeah,
horrific.
it's played off in the film as if it's funny or, like, kind of
Well,
funny.
it's not violent or it's not horrifically portrayed in the film
Yeah.
because the sheer act of it, I think, is horrific enough. And they also aren't like beating him like the way they are beating Geen, because Geen's fighting back,
Yeah.
right? Like he's obviously alive. There's like four of them on it, but there's one other person that right before he takes like a horrific blow that would have, yeah, he basically yells like "Die, old man," and like right takes the crowbar pipe, whatever. I can't actually remember right now. I think it's a steel pipe.
Yeah.
Before that happens, he gets a call that's like, "Oh, actually, our friends are doing something better over town. We should just do something else better," right?
Yeah.
Because they're taking out the trash. They're cleaning up the streets because the
Yeah.
homeless people are trash. And I think that like it's that element combined with the perception of like Geen going, shit, if I stay this way, this is how I'll die. And yes, this is the fate for me. The recognition of, wait, shit, this image and this picture look the same. I need to be better than I am. I'm going to leave. And then society's perception of them as trash reinforced as another, right, kind of external conflict
Yeah.
for Geen to kind of rise against and be like, no, regardless of anything, I need to get, like, I need to be the action hero. I need to think of myself differently, right? And I think it's nuanced because even if he thinks of himself differently, that doesn't mean society will think of him differently. And I think that whole wrapped circle
Yeah.
of
Well,
character
because
development there is
yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, because the theme of trash, as it were, is one that works on multiple levels. It's not just the trash of like, homeless people digging through like the detritus of modern society, that they themselves starting to like Geen in particular thinking of himself as trash, but also like the baby is metaphorically trash. Not just because she was thrown away, in a giant garbage pile, which is where they find her, but also it works at sort of the verbal level because in Japanese, whenever somebody said that they are abandoned, they're sterareta. So they're literally they've been thrown out because steru is literally the verb that you use for like tossing out trash. So the idea of like abandonment and trash aren't just connected on a thematic level, they're connected at a verbal level as well. So like when someone like Geen says like I'm trash, he's not necessarily, he is saying that he's like a piece of shit or whatever, but he's also saying I've been thrown out, I've been abandoned. And in the same way that he abandoned his daughter, he too has been abandoned by a larger social structure. All of these like, and we keep seeing people in the film that sort of like polite civilized society would like to deny the existence of. People like a transgender woman who used to sing in a lounge. Things like a girl who stabbed her father for probably a stupid reason, but at the same time, she feels incredibly guilty about it and she throws herself away because her father actually wants her back. Her father, like, when he gets that call from Miyuki, I think about 2/3 of the way through the film, like, he is so desperate to get her back. Gin's daughter is so desperate to get him back in her life that like all of the people in this film have both been abandoned, but then also as a function of being abandoned also desperately want to cling on to people. They want to get them back. And that's just as true of our three magi, Miyuki, Gin, and Hana, as it is of like all of the people who sort of orbit around them. Even the gangsters, like the gangsters are not like perfectly violent or perfectly bad. The Brazilian guy who shoots the guy who was previously a loan shark, he's not bad. In fact, Miyuki spends a lot of time with his, it's not his wife, it's essentially his baby mama. Um, and they have little cute scenes with each other because she has a baby, but then Miyuki also has this other baby, has
Yeah.
Kyoko. And like all of these people have been cast away by a broader society. And I think I do want to bring in very briefly sort of like the the way in which homeless people are typically viewed in Japan, because it's very much like the United States, where it's seen where even though they're human beings and like you people might recognize abstractly that homeless people, the unhoused, like have lives, they live in a place, they dwell there, they are part of society. Also, they're treated like a thing that needs to be cleaned out, that needs to be cleared away. I mean, you see this especially nowadays with the recent Supreme Court ruling in the US, where like literally cities have just been given carte blanche to treat homeless people like trash. And like, but it had been that way in Japan for years and years and years and years. And that's in part what that scene with the teenage boys, I think, is supposed to convey. I think they're teenagers. It's not made clear. Is
Yeah,
that
it's
like it's
never
just so
clear to me
casual.
when sorry.
Yeah, it's the way in which people are sort of thrown out and abandoned is so casual. And that's why that scene ends with them getting a call from their other friends like, "Oh, we're just going to go drink over here." And like, "Okay, we'll just do that instead." Because it's horrible, but it's also casual. And you have to sort of live with not necessarily the contradiction between those two things, but the sort of like the way in which they antagonize each other. And it's a very uncomfortable moment in the film for precisely that reason, is that you have these things that are sort of like held in tension with one another, and the film actually refuses to resolve them.
And I don't think the film is trying to resolve
No,
either,
yeah, yeah,
right? And I think that it wants you to hold those 2 kind of thoughts in your brain throughout the entire film, because
yeah,
at the ultimately, I think the end of the film does actually end on a positive note, right? And or, right, there is that is it a positive note? Are things going like it's a bit open-ended is what I'm
yeah, yeah,
saying,
yeah.
right? Like
I
it's
would agree with that. Yeah,
open-ended where you can read it as here is what we think happens based on what we've seen from the characters. But it's also it could just be the same day old, day in out that always is happening.
yeah,
And before we get to the end, I think this is actually a really nice segue talking about kind of that theme and of the casualness and like always keeping your 2 thoughts is into that theme of Christmas, particularly, right?
yeah,
And about finding, right, this discarded child,
yeah,
right, in the dumpster. And that theme of discarding an object or having, right, like your trash baby, but also then trying to save that trash baby in a way is saving yourself, right? That's paralleling kind of the when you open the film, it starts right with the Christmas, the Christian version of the Christmas story.
yeah,
It starts with the nativity play. There is this holy
yeah,
baby given to us by God that was found lying in a manger, which is
yeah,
basically trash,
yeah.
but
It's a stable
not.
essentially. Yeah, it's
It's the
where you put
stable
animals. Yeah,
essentially. It's not
yeah.
quite trash, but it is very much like a feed like
Well, yeah. The whole.
stable.
I mean, yeah. I mean,
The whole
this.
nativity thing, right? Is
Yeah,
like
exactly.
is a homeless baby, right?
Yeah,
That is
literally.
Jesus.
Yeah,
Jesus
yeah,
is literally in this moment. He has a home eventually, right?
yeah,
But in Bethlehem, he is a homeless baby. There is not no inn, no relatives, right? Which
yeah.
is we're not going to go into the Christianity aspect of this because if they were calling all of the heads of state back, then technically wouldn't he have had brothers that were there that could have stayed with him? But you know what? Let's not talk about that. Homeless baby, and then you have homeless baby. So like this baby is, right? Like the one-to-one kind of thing parallel for like Jesus in the terms of the kind of like film construction as you are to perceive it, right?
Yeah,
But it's done in such a realistic way that I think through the narrative and the plot of the film of trying to figure out how do we get this baby to its rightful owner, right? Owner being, I guess, the mother. Sorry,
yeah,
rightful owner. It's like a pet novel now. Um, is I think that like it'd be really fascinating to kind of talk through how that theme of Christmas, I think, really like puts the viewer into a state of being of looking at this as a more kind of character bent light that requires not just like we talked a lot about like Gein's narrative, right? But about like
yeah,
Miyuki throwing herself out for like kind of good reasons, but as a now she's a homeless child,
yeah,
right? Versus like Hana, she chose that life, but it was because she's like, well, I don't have a home to go back to, even though she did all along,
yeah.
right? She's like, no, don't worry. Money could have made
She
that
didn't have a
solved.
traditional home to go back to, but she had an actual home to go
But
back
she
to.
did have an actual home to go back to,
Yeah,
right? And so I think it's that understanding like the nature of like home and the spirit of like the Christian like Christianity Christmas. Wow, it was weird because it was like Christmas already had Christian in it, so I kind of fumbled there.
yeah,
But I think that like it's really interesting. And I think that if we hadn't started with the nativity scene, right? I think that like for me as a viewer, that scene actually stuck with me as we looked at the baby lying in the basket, as we saw the themes of the baby being carried by different people at different times,
yeah.
right? That it was like God was looking after the baby, but it's because like in the nativity story, right, the baby is God,
Yeah.
right?
Well
Like
well
nothing bad can happen to baby.
well, yeah, and so if we're going back to sort of the theme of, like, 2 seemingly contradictory things held in tension, like, according to basic Christology, Jesus himself is that tension. He's a human being, but is also God at the same time. Like, that's the whole point, is that this creature who is both divine and human at the same time is then capable. It sort of all it creates this sort of like interesting loophole, I guess you could say mythologically, where then a divine being can then take on all of the sins and everything that's wrong with humanity onto themselves, become that sacrifice for the benefit of the world. Again, this is according to sort of like, Christian dogma. And it's only through that sort of like contradiction that that sort of, I guess you could say, basic metaphysical problem gets itself worked out, at least in the Christian religion. And it's worth noting that sort of like the purity of the child of Jesus and his blameless nature, his sinless nature, is a really important component to all this. And so then the fact that the child is named Kyoko, and the fact that the film goes out of its way to explain to you that this is Kyo in the sense of Kyoi, like pure, a pure child. I mean, it's not actually the kid's name, as we later find out in the film, but for the purposes of the story, like she has to be that pure child precisely because she has to be the pure child found in the trash, because that's the function that Jesus served. Jesus was incarnated into a supposedly fallen world to redeem that fallen world, in the same way that Kyoko, in the narrative structure of the film, redeems these individuals. She, in many ways, brings out the so-called better angels of their nature. And in fact, at one point, Gin even has a kind of has a kind of annunciation moment where that girl from the host club, hostess club, is dressed up like an angel, and she appears as an angel to him to announce, to have an annunciation. And but then he later realizes that she's just a woman. And so, but in many ways, like every figure within the nativity sort of story is just a person who is then called upon for a greater purpose. Mary is a human being called upon for a greater purpose. Joseph is called upon to raise a child that is not his own, which is, again, very like apropos given the themes of this film. You have these three guys from a totally foreign country who see a star up in the sky and are like, hey, that's a that's got to mean something, that's an omen. And so they travel a really long distance just to see this child who is in a fucking like stall and are sort of mesmerized by the whole thing, because the point, I guess you could say, if you want to kind of divorce it from like the religious aspect a little bit, the purpose of Kyoko as a character is to move people away from their expectations that they are worthless. In other words, the function she serves in the film is to give each character an opportunity to prove that they have value to themselves and to others. And in the
Yeah.
way they all care for each other, the way they go out of their way, like these three homeless people, like there's no really good reason for why they're doing this other than sort of like the way they see in this child their own defects. But the point is that they see their own in seeing their own defects, it allows them to actually overcome them. And that's why it's actually, I mean, despite being a really brutal film in a lot of ways, it's also an extremely sweet film.
Yeah,
Because
and I
yeah,
oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead and explain why you were gonna say it's incredibly sweet, and then I'll piggyback off of it because I
It,
think that yeah,
it's incredibly sweet because every single, so if you look at the three main characters, if you look at Miyuki, Hana, and Gin, they have essentially like thrown themselves away to a certain degree because they feel like what has happened to them means that they are no longer worthy,
right.
that they feel worthless. But the reason why it is, to my mind, such a sweet movie is because like they don't come to understand that they're actually better than the bad things that have happened to them. They understand that they can be good people even with the bad things that they have done and the bad things that have happened to them. They don't
Right.
actually have to like sequester themselves from the rest of society.
And I think that's actually what's incredibly important about the nativity story and what it represents in the religious connotation. Like, I don't think it'd be, I do like that you presented it with, hey guys, if like talking about religion makes you feel uncomfortable and you want to divorce it, just recognize that Kyoko's like character, right, regardless of the Christian religion,
Yeah.
is to move the plot forward and to give us the ultimate question that we find in a lot of films like this that have an aspect of divine, right, in them, or of gods, or like anything, right? Even if
Yeah.
it's a film about ghosts, right? And you're like, oh, it's because like they went to hell or something, or they have unfinished business. Well, that
Yeah.
obviously assumes an afterlife, everyone. So it's just so we're clear, is that does the baby like are they actually the ones saving the baby, or is the baby saving them? Right.
The answer
And
is
I think
yes.
that, and the answer is yes, right? But also no. But anyway, before I talk about that, let's talk about those sins of the past, right? Is that
Yeah.
I think that what you find is that a lot of people in just modern society, and the reason why the film sticks out for me is that a lot of people get the nature of kind of Jesus' sacrifice wrong, even in modern religion and modern Christianity, is that it's all about worth, right? Earning your place into heaven, always being a good person, always abiding by the law, right? Like the 10 commandments and all of that.
Yeah.
You have read the Bible, you've got to study the Bible, you have to, look at this book as if it's like your lifeblood and etc. And at the end of the day, you have this worth, right? Worthiness. Am I worthy to be a human being? I'm not worthy to be a human being, says, right, Gin. I'm trash. I'm discarded. Same with Miyuki. Every time she tries to confront the fact that she is a good person, but also stabbed her father,
Yeah.
she's like, good people don't stab people. I am not worthy to be called a human being. I am trash, right? Even Hana then like gets into a little bit more nuanced with her, right, sexuality and gender and homelessness, right? Like that whole trifecta that we don't have time to go into today.
Yeah, it's really
But
complex.
it's very complex. But what I will say is that Hana of all of them actually is like, no, I do deserve to be alive. This is why this baby deserves to be alive. This is why I, right, even though it's selfish, let me be a mother because I am worthy to be a mother. And it's interesting. And I want to bring that into the Christianity aspect of it because Hana's also the one that is very like somewhat tongue-in-cheek Christian in that she always says everything is kind of this is my divine, this is God's gift, God loves this kid. She's the only one that
I would say
constantly keeps throwing God's name out there,
she
but
has
it's
a faith. She has
almost
a faith of some kind. It's
she
not
has a
clear
faith
what
of
that
some
is.
kind. It's not clear, but it is faith, right? And
Yeah.
that's what I just wanted to hone in on, right? Is that her ability to have that faith that things will work out, right? And her going, I am trash, but I still have faith in myself is actually very reminiscent to the ultimate kind of sacrifice that we see in that nativity play. It's like it doesn't matter who you are, Jesus saved your sins. You are worthy of being a human. You are worthy of, say, this divine, right, nature or divine grace, right? We call it,
Yeah.
right? So instead of trying to earn, right, the merits or try to always be good, it's like, no, you need to acknowledge your faults, acknowledge your sins. And even Hannah's argument, right, to Gene in that scene we've talked about where he's like, she sees his daughter alive and well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
She's the one that's going, why did you lie? Right? Why did you deceive it? How could you do that? How could you not confront the sins, right, that made you get to where you were? Because for Hannah, she always did. And I think that's really incredibly powerful and important that even her, right, was like, no, 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 I know that I could have come back to this home that I found family, but I didn't, right? And I couldn't do that to you. I couldn't be a bother to you. And so now you get to see kind of like, I think the layers, right, of the characters and of like their different contrasting personalities. I think that because of that Christmas kind of spirit, right, is what we'll call it, right? That Christmas dichotomy is that, as Nicholas is talking about them reconciling and looking through Kyoko as this is how I get to, this is the reason why I am doing this plot, is because even at the end of the day, Hana is like, okay, well, you'll just take it to the police now. It's like, no, because now you're almost there. You're so close. Just keep walking around with the baby for a day,
Yeah.
right? To kind of find her home, only to discover, oh, wait, this isn't her home. And then it revealing that Sachiko isn't the mother. They're like, shit, it is all up to us. Like, we're the only ones that can save this baby. Even though, quite frankly, if they had just gone to the police in
Yeah,
like the
and that, and
beginning of the
yeah, it was,
show,
yeah, it's a bit that runs throughout the entire movie. It's like, just go to the police. Just, which, if they
right?
had done, it would have been fine.
Yeah, which the baby, like, it would have been fine, and the parents would have gotten it a lot easier,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like, even Miyuki was like, just go to the police, like, not forgetting that her dad's a cop, but just being like, let's just go to the police. And so I think it's interesting, right? Is that there's that you are discarded, you've been discarded. It's the thing society don't wants to see, right? That's all the sins. And then
yeah,
they take on all of those sins and all of that narrative of I'm being discarded. And then when they see this, right, baby, that's been discarded. This pure, to be fair, it's a baby. It is an actual human baby. And it doesn't feel religious to me because it is a real baby, because
Yeah.
it's like that is pure and innocent. Like this baby did nothing
Yeah.
because this baby could not do anything,
Yeah.
right? So they're like, no, now we have to save the baby, but also the baby is the pure thing that ends up right saving them.
Well,
And so,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
oh no, that's it. That's
I
it.
was just gonna say that and was discarded, was abandoned not because was basically abandoned because of one woman's delusion. In other words, she was wanted by her actual parents. Her parents are desperately trying to find her. But the only reason why Kyoko is found in this circumstance to begin with, is precisely because this woman, Sachiko, can't actually get past her own delusion and her own romanticized beliefs about herself. Like that is what caused that to happen. Additionally, okay, I do want to push back a little bit because I think Hana actually does have a fundamental contradiction, but it's harder to see precisely because it's not so like upfront as with Gin and with Miyuki. And it's that she is very capable of caring for others, but where she kind of falls apart is that her unwillingness to be cared for. In fact, that's the whole I think to me that's the whole point of how she ends up in the hospital, is because she actually hasn't been taking care of herself. And it's only when like her health gets to such a state where she no longer can do anything at all that other people then have to step in and help her. And I think that's actually the source of her conflict with her mother at the club, is that, her quote unquote mother, is that she didn't come back because, as she says, like, I didn't want to do that to you. But really, that's sort of deflecting from the fact that, like, she's very bad at letting herself be cared for. And in fact, in many ways, not only is she sort of like Kyoko's first surrogate mother, but she is also the child as well. And that's the part of herself that she refuses to accept. And that is also very important to the religious aspect of the film, because it's not just about recognizing your worth as a human being, but it's also about being willing to admit to your fault. And your fault isn't necessarily a sin in the classical sense. It's not always
Or a sin in the Western sense
well,
of the
okay, so like
classic Western
yeah,
sense.
so,
Yeah,
so like
yeah.
if you look at the liturgy in the church, there are a lot of these sort of like weird dichotomous things that you're expected to say. So like for example, the classic thing from the book of Mark, like love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, it's this idea that like through caring for other people, you always so recognize the way in which people care for you. And also like there's this bit in the liturgy that's always stuck with me from a very early age, even though I basically consider myself an atheist now. It's this in the sort of the primary confession near the beginning of at least the Lutheran service. You say something to the effect of, we have sinned against you in thought, word, and deed by what we have done, which is sort of like the classic sin of commission, and by what we have left undone. And so in many ways,
Ooh,
it's that second half where
not in the
Hana
Bible at all.
fails. It's
It's fine. Continue.
anyway, the point is, like, there is this dichotomous relationship where it's like there's the thing that's easy to see, the thing that someone did wrong. In other words, the thing that Gin did wrong to his daughter, the thing that Miyuki did wrong to her father. But the thing that Hana has quote unquote done wrong is more like an omission, and that omission is something that she did in a sense to herself. She has sinned
Yeah.
against herself in many ways. And that's why I think it's a little bit harder to see, but that's also what makes it deeply Christian, at least in an idealized sense.
Yeah.
In a
Yeah, and I
practical,
and I think
yeah,
I think it is, right, practically in an idealized sense. And I think that it's always interesting because I think in any country, right, even if you could say the majority of the people in that country are Christian, right, I think that it's the perception, right, of Christianity in of itself and how it is applied, right,
yeah,
that actually determines, like you had mentioned, like the things that stick with you, right? Versus for me, I was like, I don't remember reading that in the Bible. So like that was our right. Like I didn't ever have a liturgical practice, you could say,
yeah.
growing up. Though I would say that I grew up in a very spiritual household, right? But it was very much more like the fate, destiny, God's plan, with the dichotomy of free will as well. So like that was always a fun thought experiment late at night with my parents.
Yeah.
But I think that like it's all of those things, right? That's a person's perception. It's an interpretation. And I think if we kind of look at the film through that, I'm glad you brought up the things that we have done and the things that are left undone, because Hannah did have a lot of things left undone.
Yeah.
Right? She had a significant loss of her lover in her life, and she's like, after then, I just can't do anything anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I can't move on. I can't go back. I can't care for myself until I see a child and I realize, crap, like I'm the one that needs to be taken care of, but I'm still going to apologize for it. I'm so sorry you had to pay my medical bill. I'm so sorry that I didn't just come home.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah.
apologizing on the things that she should have done. And I think that when we look at that kind of perception, right? I think that's what's been really, really great about the film is it uses the perception of Christianity, but also then not changes. What do I want to say here? It forces you to have a perception of the nativity scene,
Yeah.
right? By both presenting it, just so we're clear, if you've never seen the movie, please go watch it. It's only like an hour and a half. But it presents the nativity scene, and when I mentioned a tongue-in-cheek way, is that it both presents it from a everyone who believes, Hana who like believes enough, right, or has some sort of faith enough to think that this god is a god,
Yeah.
right, and then Gin who's just like, finally, my free food.
Yeah.
Why can I not get my free food, right? And that nature of chance, destiny, fate, right? That kind of like thread throughout the movie, which also then has more of a red thread Eastern perception, right? It's just something that really ties the film together really nicely. That I think that it really does come down to the perceptions we have of each other and ourselves, but that Satoshi Kon does an amazing job of directing it in a way that makes you go, this is a Christmas movie, versus it could have technically happened at any time of the year. But that theme, right, of Christmas, right, and a Christian Christmas,
Yeah.
particularly, like even more so, right, than say a Kentucky Fried Chicken Christmas, is kind of what makes you right see
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. We're not going to talk about Christmas cake or any of that stuff.
No, exactly. No carolers, no Fruit Loops, like nothing of like the actual West. You could say Western Victorian tradition of Christmas is
Or
there,
even
but
the
it is the
Japanese Christmas
or
tradition.
even Japanese Christmas isn't there either,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like it is actually just a theme, right, of the film, and I think that that in of itself is a pretty interesting. I was going to say ploy, but it's a really great plot device, is what I'm actually trying to say.
Yeah. And I think actually Lauren wrapped things up really well. So I would like to leave everything there. As I noted earlier in this episode, we're going to be doing our year in review over on Patreon. So once again, that's patreon.com/Furidashi. Lauren, you are on Blue Sky now as Espresso Cat, correct?
I am. I am on Blue Sky as Espresso Cat.
And I haven't decided what I'm going to do about social media, so I'm kind of in a limbo at this point. But once I have a firm sense of where I'm going to land, I'll let you all know. Again, thank you all for listening. We're so glad that you have been with us throughout the year. And if you're only just starting with us, we're glad you're here. And we hope to have great conversations with you again in the coming year.